The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It was a standard-looking envelope, cream-colored, embossed with the seal of Hargrove County, Tennessee, and it sat on my father's kitchen table for 3 days before he opened it. I know this because I was the one who picked up his mail when I visited that weekend, and I noticed it sitting there between a seed catalog and an electric bill, slightly wrinkled at one corner like someone had touched it and then deliberately set it back down. Like my father had looked at it, decided whatever was inside could wait, and gone back out to walk his land. That was Earl Calhoun for you. 71 years old, 6'2", even with the slight stoop that age had given him, with hands that looked like they'd been carved from the same oak that grew along the creek behind our childhood home. He didn't rush anything. He didn't react to things. He absorbed them slowly, quietly, the way the limestone bluffs along Harrow Creek absorbed the rain, turning it into something useful and underground before anyone could see it moving. I didn't know that Tuesday what was in that envelope. I didn't know that my father had already known what was in it for 6 months before it arrived. And I certainly didn't know that I had been working for the past 2 years to solve the exact same problem he had been circling for the past 4, and that we had, without ever speaking a single word about it to each other, arrived at a collision point that would change everything between us. The bridge at the south end of Otter Creek Estates HOA connected 47 homes to County Road 7. Without it, there was no access, no mail delivery, no emergency vehicles. No way in or out except a 12-mile detour over a logging road that turned to soup every March and October. And the bridge, that single-lane concrete and steel structure built in 1987, engineered for maybe 15 more years of life, sat on land that my father now owned. All 1,500 acres of it. Let me back up. My father bought the Whitmore tract in 2 phases over 14 months, and he did it so quietly that even I, his only son, his business partner of 12 years, the man who co-signed on the farm equipment and handled the QuickBooks, didn't know the full picture until it was nearly complete. The Whitmore tract was an old timber and cattle parcel that had been in the Whitmore family since the 1930s. When Delbert Whitmore died in 2019, he left it to his 3 adult children, Cecilia, who lived in Nashville, Harold, who lived in Scottsdale, and Ray, who still worked part of the land but was drowning in debt. They couldn't agree on anything. They fought over the estate for 2 years, and by late 2021, all 3 of them just wanted out. My father started making calls in January of 2022. He didn't tell me. He told my mother briefly, in that way he had of stating enormous things like they were weather reports, and swore her to silence. I need to think through whether it makes sense before I bring Marcus in, he told her, according to what she admitted to me much later. If it doesn't work, I don't want him to know I tried. He was protecting me. That was his way. He'd been doing it my entire life. What he was actually doing was this. Over 14 months, using a combination of savings, a quiet conversation with Hargrove County Agricultural Trust, and 2 bridge loans he negotiated directly with the First National Bank of Cookeville. He purchased 1,500 acres of Whitmore land in 3 separate transactions, each small enough to avoid the real estate transfer reporting threshold that might have drawn attention. Phase 1, 480 acres, the northern timber section, purchased through an LLC my father had quietly formed 18 months prior. Henderson Timber Holdings, LLC, my mother's maiden name. He'd paid $800 an acre. Phase 2, 620 acres, the central pasture and creek bottom land, purchased 6 months later. $950 an acre. Phase 3, the southern 400 acres, the rocky, scrubby, less valuable land that nobody had wanted. The land the Whitmore heirs were practically giving away because it had no commercial timber, the pasture was thin, and the only feature of apparent note was a small creek tributary and a stand of old-growth cedar. He paid $400 an acre for that last section. He paid that price because he knew something the Whitmore heirs did not know, something their Nashville real estate attorney had apparently not thought to mention, something that wasn't obvious unless you'd spent decades walking every inch of that county and reading every survey and easement record filed since 1960. The southern 400 acres contained the land beneath the Otter Creek Estates bridge. Not just near it, beneath it. The bridge had been built in 1987 by a developer named Gus Fenwick who'd purchased an easement from old Porter Whitmore, Delbert's father, for $1 and a handshake, and a document that the county recorder's office had lost in a 1994 flood. The easement had never been refiled. The HOA had been operating under the assumption that the bridge was on dedicated county land for 36 years. It was not. My father discovered this during a routine survey of the property lines before making his final offer on the southern section. His surveyor, a man named Bud Crenshaw who'd been doing land work in Hargrove County for 40 years, flagged it in a 3-line note at the bottom of a 40-page document. Note: bridge structure at coordinate 35, 8,847 degrees N, 85. 4,821 degrees W appears to be sited on private parcel, not county road right-of-way. Recommend title search before closing. My father did the title search himself, drove to the courthouse, pulled the records, sat for 2 hours in the county recorder's office going through microfilm. Then he drove home, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the wall for a long time. He bought the land 3 weeks later. Now let me tell you what I was doing during those same 14 months. I am Marcus Calhoun. I'm 43 years old, and I run a small agricultural consulting practice out of Cookeville, while also helping manage my father's farming operation. I have a master's degree in land use law from the University of Tennessee, which I've always said was the most useless and most useful degree I've ever heard of, depending on the week. 2 years ago, I started getting calls from people in Otter Creek Estates. The first call was from a woman named Diane Harlow, who'd bought a house out there in 2018 and served on the HOA board. She'd gotten my name from someone at the county extension office. She wanted to know about infrastructure easements and whether an HOA had any legal obligation to maintain a bridge that crossed onto what she thought might be ambiguous land. I told her I'd look into it. I looked into it. What I found stopped me cold. I'll be honest, I had no idea at this point that my father was anywhere near this situation. The Whitmore land was a separate universe in my mind. I knew it had come on the market. I knew my father had expressed vague interest. I didn't know he'd already bought the first 480 acres. What I found, through my own title research, was the same missing easement my father's surveyor had flagged. The bridge had no legal easement. The land it sat on was private property belonging to the Whitmore estate, which, as of my research in March of 2023, was still technically in probate transition. I started a file. I began quietly consulting with Diane Harlow about options, and then I started making my own moves. Because here's the thing about land use law that most people don't understand. The absence of a recorded easement doesn't mean an easement can't be established. It means someone needs to either go to court to establish a prescriptive easement, essentially proving the public has used this crossing for decades with the landowner's implied permission, or negotiate a new easement directly with whoever comes to own the land. I started preparing for both scenarios. On the legal side, I began collecting documentation, aerial photographs going back to 1987, county road maintenance records showing the county had never claimed the bridge, utility crossing permits, HOA maintenance invoices. I was building a prescriptive easement case that I thought we could win. On the negotiation side, I was doing something else. I was quietly researching who was buying the Whitmore land. By September of 2023, I knew Phase 1 and Phase 2 had closed. The LLC name, Henderson Timber Holdings, didn't ring any bells for me. I ran it through the Secretary of State's business registry and found it had been filed by an attorney in Cookeville named Philip Goss, who did a lot of agricultural work. I called Philip Goss. He was, professionally, a vault. Told me nothing except that his client was a private individual with legitimate agricultural interests and no current plans for development. I spent 3 months trying to figure out who was behind Henderson Timber Holdings. I never thought to look at my own father. Why would I? He'd never mentioned it. He'd never given me any indication. We talked twice a week, had lunch every other Sunday, and worked through farm business together every month. Not once, did he say a word about 1,500 acres, or the Whitmore heirs, or a bridge at the south end of Otter Creek Estates. I found out the way I found out everything important about my father. By accident, through someone else, at a moment he hadn't planned. The HOA crisis broke open in November of 2023. Hargrove County's Bridge Inspection Unit had been going through a backlog of rural structure assessments, and the Otter Creek Bridge finally came up in their rotation. The inspection report came back with a structural rating of 4 out of 100 failing, and a recommendation for immediate load restriction and a mandatory engineering review within 90 days. The HOA board held an emergency meeting. Diane Harlow called me at 9 o'clock that night. "Marcus, we have a real problem," she said. Her voice was tight in a way I recognized as controlled panic, the voice of a sensible person trying to stay sensible while standing next to a fire. "The bridge is failing. The county says they won't fund repairs because it's not a county bridge. We have 47 households. 2 of them have residents with medical conditions that require regular transport. And we now have reason to believe we don't even have a legal right to the land under the bridge." "Tell me what you know," I said. She told me. It confirmed most of what I already had in my file, but there was a new piece. "We finally found out who owns the southern Whitmore parcel," she said. "The last transaction closed 3 months ago. Our attorney pulled the deed this week." I waited. "It's someone called Henderson Timber Holdings, LLC, she said. "Do you know who that is?" I told her I was still working on it. That was a Tuesday. On Thursday, I drove out to look at the bridge myself for the first time in months. I parked on the county road side and walked out to the center of the span, looking down at the creek below, at the winter-bare trees along the bank, at the scrubby far shore that was, I now understood, someone's private property. I stood there for a long time. Then I turned around and I saw my father's truck parked on the far side of the bridge. He was standing outside the cab, leaning against the hood with his arms crossed, watching me. We looked at each other across the length of the bridge. Neither of us said anything for a long moment. "Nice morning for a walk," my father said finally. "Dad," I said, "what are you doing out here?" "Checking on my land," he said, and then I knew. The weight of it hit me like a physical thing, all the months of research, all the conversations with Diane Harlow, all the legal documents and aerial photographs and conversations with Philip Goss. It all reorganized itself in about 4 seconds, and the new picture it made was one I hadn't seen coming. "Henderson Timber Holdings," I said. My father said nothing. Just looked at me with that expression he'd worn my entire life, patient, steady, slightly amused by the fact that I'd taken this long to catch up. "Henderson," I said again. "Mom's maiden name." "It's a good LLC name," he said. I walked off the bridge toward him. I stopped about 10 feet away. "How long have you known about the easement?" "Since before I bought the southern section." "And you bought it anyway." "I bought it because of it," he said. I stared at him. "Dad, there are 47 families on the other side of this bridge." "I know that, Marcus. There's a woman named Eleanor Fitch who's on dialysis 3 times a week. She lives in the 3rd house past the bridge. She drives across this thing to get to her treatments." Something moved in my father's face. Not surprise he knew Eleanor Fitch, it turned out. He'd already looked up who lived in every house in Otter Creek Estates, but the mention of her hit him somewhere. "I know," he said again quietly. "Then what is your plan?" I asked. "Because I have spent the last 18 months helping these people build a legal case. I have prescriptive easement documentation. I have an attorney ready to file. And you own the land, which means you're the one they'd be filing against." My father looked at the bridge, then back at me. "I have a plan," he said. "Tell me." "Not yet," he said. "Come to Sunday lunch." He got in his truck and drove away across his bridge on his land, and I stood there in the November wind feeling, for the first time in my adult life, like I was playing chess against someone who'd seen the board 10 moves further than I had. Sunday lunch at Earl Calhoun's house had been a ritual my entire life. My mother Vera made pot roast and cornbread and sweet tea with enough sugar in it to require a physician's waiver. My wife Jenna came. Our daughter Sophie, who was 9, ran the backyard with my parents' old Beagle tractor. It looked like every other Sunday. It was not every other Sunday, because when I arrived, there were 2 cars in the driveway I didn't recognize. One was a blue Subaru I'd never seen. The other was a sensible gray Camry that turned out to belong to a woman named Carol Nguyen, the lead attorney at a Cookville land trust organization called Hargrove County Conservancy. I walked into the house and found my father in the living room with Carol Nguyen, a man I didn't know named David Park who turned out to be a civil engineer, and Diane Harlow. Diane Harlow, who was supposed to be on my side of this thing. She looked at me when I walked in, and her expression was complicated, sheepish, and relieved, and something else I couldn't quite read. "Marcus," my father said, standing, "sit down." "What is this?" I said. "Sit down," he said again, but gently. "There are some things you need to hear." My mother appeared from the kitchen, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and sat in the corner chair with the particular expression she wore when she had known something was happening for a long time and was glad it was finally coming out. She looked like someone watching a movie whose ending she'd already seen. I sat down. David Park, the engineer, spoke first. He pulled out a rolled set of plans and spread them on the coffee table. "Mr. Calhoun asked me to do a bridge assessment about 4 months ago," he said. "Independent of the county inspection, I want to walk you through what I found." He walked me through what he found. The bridge was failing, yes, but not irreparably. With proper engineering intervention, steel reinforcement of the 2 primary span beams, replacement of the concrete deck sections showing carbonation damage, and installation of proper drainage to stop the freeze-thaw cycling that was accelerating the deterioration, the bridge could be given another 50 to 60 years of service life. The cost, he estimated, was $340,000. "The county won't pay for it," David said. "They don't own it, and frankly, their rural bridge fund is already committed for the next 4 years. The HOA doesn't have the reserves. They've got maybe $80,000 in their account, so there's a gap." I looked at my father. "You're going to pay for it." "Some of it," he said. "Keep listening." Carol Nguyen leaned forward. "Your father approached us 6 months ago," she said. "What he proposed is this. Henderson Timber Holdings donates a permanent access easement across the southern parcel to Hargrove County Conservancy, which holds it in perpetuity for the benefit of the Otter Creek Estates residents. The easement is recorded, legally bulletproof, and structured in a way that obligates future landowners to maintain the bridge access in perpetuity." "In exchange for what?" I asked. "A conservation easement on the northern 800 acres, Carol said. "Your father donates development rights on the timber land in exchange for significant tax benefits. He keeps farming rights, keeps the timber operation, but the land can never be subdivided or developed, and the Conservancy takes on co-responsibility for the bridge access corridor." I was quiet for a moment. "The funding gap," my father said, watching me, "is $260,000, after what the HOA can contribute." He let that sit. "You have $260,000, I said. "I have $180,000 I can put in," he said. "And then there's a gap." He looked at me, and I felt it coming before he said it, the way you feel weather before it arrives. "Marcus," he said, "tell me what you've been doing for the past 18 months. And here is where the whole thing came apart, and came together at the same time. I looked at Diane Harlow. She had the grace to look down at her hands. "You told him," I said. "I didn't know," she said. "I didn't know you were his son until 2 weeks ago. You told me you were working with an attorney on a prescriptive easement case. Your father told me he was working with a conservancy on an access easement deal. I was talking to both of you separately for months, thinking they were 2 completely different things, and then your father mentioned his son, the land use attorney, and I just—" She spread her hands. "I put it together." I looked at my father. "You knew I was working on the prescriptive case," I said. "I found out 4 months ago," he said. "Philip Goss called me and mentioned that someone had been asking about Henderson Timber Holdings. I made some calls. I found out it was you." He paused. "I was proud of you, Marcus. That's the honest truth. You'd already built a case I'd have needed to pay a top-tier attorney $100,000 to construct. But you didn't tell me." "No. Why?" My father was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that, in 30 years of being his son, I had learned to let sit. You could not rush Earl Calhoun towards something he wasn't ready to say. "Because if I told you what I was doing," he finally said, "you would have talked me out of it." "Talked you out of donating an easement. Dad, that's a good outcome." "Not the easement, the purchase." He looked at me steadily. "You would have told me not to buy the land. You would have said it was too much capital tied up, that at my age I shouldn't be taking on that kind of debt exposure, that there were too many variables in the Whitmore estate situation to commit." "Yes," I said, "that is exactly what I would have said." I know, he said. That's why I didn't tell you. And something in the room shifted. I could feel everyone in it go still, my mother in her corner chair, Diane Harlow on the couch, Carol Nguyen with her hands folded, David Park with his rolled plans. Even Jenna, who had appeared in the doorway from the kitchen at some point and was standing very quiet, watching me and my father. I'm trying to understand what you actually did, I said, and my voice came out different than I expected, not hard, just careful. Walk me through it. All of it from the beginning. My father settled back in his chair. I started thinking about Otter Creek about 4 years ago, he said. When I heard the Whitmore estate was going to go to auction eventually, I started paying attention to the land records. I found the easement issue myself before Bud Crenshaw flagged it in the survey. I'd actually gone to the courthouse and looked at the original Whitmore deed packages. I found the 1987 easement document, or rather, I found the absence of a proper recorded easement. Just a notation in old Porter Whitmore's ledger that Gus Fenwick had paid him $1 for bridge rights. $1, I said. $1, he confirmed, and a handshake. And 36 years later, 47 families have been living across a bridge that has no legal right to exist. So you bought the land to what? Protect them? I bought the land, my father said carefully, because I knew what would happen if I didn't. The Whitmore estate would have eventually sold that southern section to whoever offered, and whoever offered might have been someone who saw that bridge situation the same way I saw it, as leverage, not as a problem to solve, as a tool, because Marcus, whoever owns that land, owns the ability to shut down access to 47 homes. You know that. You spent 18 months building a legal case to stop it from being used that way. A case you knew about and didn't help me with. A case I knew about and didn't interfere with, he corrected. Because you building that case was the right thing to do regardless of what I was doing. If my plan fell apart, your case was the backup. He stopped. I didn't know that we had both been working on it. I stared at him. We were both trying to do the same thing, I said. My father nodded, slowly. For 4 years in my way, for 18 months in your way, and neither of us said a word to the other. Jenna made a sound from the doorway that might have been a laugh or might have been something else entirely. I glanced at her. She was pressing her lips together, eyes bright. My mother in her corner chair said quietly, I told him he should tell you when it started. I told him. Vera, my father said. She's right, I said. You should have told me. Yes, my father said, then after a pause, and you should have told me. I opened my mouth, closed it. He was right. I had known about the bridge situation for 18 months. I had known the Whitmore land was a factor. I had never told my father because I had, somewhere in the back of my professional mind, categorized it as my case, my client, my work. I had not thought to bring my father in because I handled land use law and he was a farmer, and I had managed, without quite realizing it, to draw a line between our roles that didn't need to be there. He had done the same thing in reverse, hadn't told me about the land purchase because he handled land and I was the attorney, and he'd assumed I would second-guess his instincts with professional caution. We had been running parallel tracks for years, each certain we knew what the other would say, each protecting the other from information that would have made both of our plans faster, cleaner, and more effective. How much does your prescriptive easement case need to complete? He asked. I have everything I need to file, I said. It's ready. Don't file it, he said. If we do Carol's deal. We don't need it, he said. If we do Carol's deal, there's no lawsuit, there's no adversarial proceeding, there's just a recorded easement and a fixed bridge. I looked at Carol Nguyen. Is the deal solid? As solid as these things get, she said. The tax structure is clean. The easement language is tight. I drafted it with 2 partners, and we had it reviewed by a property rights specialist in Nashville. It protects the HOA in perpetuity, it protects your father's heirs, and it provides a clear maintenance obligation structure. And the funding gap. She looked at my father, then back at me. Your father was going to ask you to cover the last $80,000, she said. He thought you might have it available between your practice accounts and your investment reserves. I looked at my father. You were going to ask me for money, I said. I was going to ask you to invest in something I thought you'd believe in, he said. There's a difference. We sat with that for a long moment. Diane Harlow was very still. David Park had quietly rolled his plans back up and was holding them in his lap like a student who'd finished his presentation and was waiting to see what grade he got. Carol Nguyen looked between me and my father with the practiced patience of someone who had sat in many rooms while families worked through complicated things. "Can I have a minute?" I said. I stood up and walked out through the back door into my parents' backyard, where Sophie was running with Tractor the Beagle along the fence line, laughing at something only a 9-year-old and a dog could find funny. The November air was cold and still and smelled like dead leaves and wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney somewhere. Jenna came out a few minutes later and stood next to me. "You knew," I said. "I suspected something was going on about 6 months ago," she said. "Your dad mentioned the bridge once when we were helping him with the tractor, and the way he mentioned it, like it wasn't really a question, like he already knew the answer, I thought he knew something. But I didn't want to get in the middle of it." "You should have told me." "You should have talked to your father," she said, not unkindly, just steady. Jenna was like that. She could say the thing that landed hardest in the gentlest possible voice. I watched Sophie throw a stick for Tractor. "He bought 1,500 acres, I said. "He did it in secret. He negotiated with a bank, a conservancy, an engineer, and an HOA board member, all without saying a single word to me, for 4 years. He's been protecting you your whole life," Jenna said. "He doesn't know how to stop." "I'm 43. "He knows that," she said. "I don't think it changes anything for him." I thought about my father at the courthouse going through microfilm. I thought about him calling Philip Goss, and Goss telling him that someone was asking about his LLC, and my father quietly working out that the someone was his own son. I thought about him driving out to stand by his truck at the edge of the bridge, watching me walk across it, waiting for me to catch up. He was going to close a $340,000 bridge repair deal, I said, and the last piece of the puzzle was asking me to write a check. "Is that a problem?" I thought about it. "No," I said. "Actually, no, it's not." I turned around and went back inside. My father was still in his chair. He had the look he got when he was waiting for something important, not anxious, just attentive. Like a man watching a field he'd planted, willing to wait as long as it took. "I have $95,000 in my practice reserve account," I said, standing in the doorway. "I can put in $80,000 and keep a cushion." Carol Nguyen made a small, controlled sound of relief. "But I want something in return," I said. My father tilted his head slightly. "What?" "I want you to deed 50 acres of the southern section to me," I said. "Not as payment. As a partnership, I want to be on the ownership record. If there's ever a future dispute about this easement, I want to be a co-grantor, not just the son of the guy who set this up. Because when you're gone," my voice caught slightly on that, and I let it because it was true and I didn't want to pretend it wasn't. "When you're gone, Dad, I'm the one who's going to be managing this. I need to be in the structure." My father was quiet. "That's not sentiment," I said. "That's professional logic. Put me in the paperwork." He looked at Carol Nguyen. "It can be structured that way," she said carefully. "It actually strengthens the easement grant to have multiple grantors." My father looked back at me. 50 acres, he said. 50 acres. He nodded once, slow. "All right," he said, "and one more thing." He waited. "You tell me things," I said. "Going forward, big decisions, land decisions, financial decisions, you tell me. Not because I'm going to talk you out of them. Because we're better at this together than we are apart, and we both just proved that by almost destroying a deal that could have been done in 6 months if we'd worked on it side by side." My father was very still. Then he said, in a voice that was slightly different than his usual voice, quieter, with something underneath it I didn't often hear. "I didn't want you to think I was getting old and making mistakes." I crossed the room and sat on the arm of the couch closest to his chair. "Dad," I said, "you bought 1,500 acres of land, found a legal vulnerability that a 36-year-old easement issue had created, quietly assembled a conservation deal with a county land trust, identified an engineering solution for a failing bridge, and then waited patiently while your own son worked on the same problem for a year and a half without realizing it. That is possibly the most competent thing I have ever heard of anyone doing." My father said nothing for a moment, then he said, "Philip Goss helped." Sure he did, I said. Give me 50 acres and let me help too. The easement was recorded on February 14th, 2024, Valentine's Day, which my mother found deeply significant and my father found mildly embarrassing. Henderson Timber Holdings, LLC, and Marcus Earl Calhoun, as co-grantors, transferred a permanent access easement to Hargrove County Conservancy for the benefit of the residents of Otter Creek Estates. The easement was recorded, stamped, indexed, and as legally bulletproof as Carol Nguyen had promised. Bridge construction began in March, as soon as the ground thawed enough for the equipment. David Park ran the project. He was meticulous and methodical and came in $8,000 under budget, which meant I got $8,000 back, which I used to take Jenna on a trip to Savannah that she'd been wanting to take for years. She said it didn't count as a romantic gesture since it was technically bridge money. I told her the bridge had been a romantic gesture all along. It just took a long time to understand that. Eleanor Fitch, who drove across the bridge 3 times a week for dialysis, sent my father a card when the construction was complete. It was a simple card, the kind you buy at a gas station with a watercolor flower on the front. Inside, she had written in careful cursive, "I don't know exactly what you did, but I know you did something and it kept me going. Thank you." My father kept it on the refrigerator. I know because I saw it every Sunday for a year. Diane Harlow remained on the HOA board and, as of this writing, is serving as board president. She sends my father a Christmas card He sends her back a card that says Merry Christmas and is signed every year simply Earl, no last name, no return address. He finds this funny for reasons I have never fully understood. Philip Goss, the attorney, played golf with my father twice that summer and apparently beat him both times, which is either a lie or a miracle, because my father is an excellent golfer and does not lose gracefully. The bridge opened on June 3rd, 2024. David Park had installed a small bronze plaque at the east end of the railing, which read, "Reconstructed 2024, Otter Creek Bridge, safe passage for all." He hadn't told us he was going to do it, he just did it. When my father saw it, he stood there for a moment without saying anything, and then cleared his throat and said something about the concrete deck color being slightly off from the original and walked on. I didn't say anything about his eyes being red. Some things I have learned from my father are better left unremarked upon. There is a lesson in this story, and I'll tell you what I think it is, because I've spent the better part of a year thinking about it. My father spent 4 years solving a problem alone because he was afraid I would underestimate him. Afraid that if he brought me in, I would apply professional caution to a decision that required instinct and patience, and the kind of knowledge you can only get from a lifetime of walking land. I spent 18 months solving the same problem alone because I was afraid he would overestimate me, afraid that if I brought him in, he'd see the limitations of my approach, the gaps in my legal strategy, the ways in which I was working around the edges of a problem he might have attacked differently. We were both afraid of the same thing, that the other one would see us clearly and find us wanting, and we both got it exactly backward. What my father had was vision, the long view, the patience, the willingness to commit completely to a thing before telling anyone about it. What I had was structure, the legal framework, the documentation, the professional network to execute the deal. We needed each other. We'd always needed each other. We just spent our whole lives being too careful with each other to see it. The 50 acres he deeded to me sits at the southeast corner of the Whitmore Tract, along the creek. There's nothing on it worth commercial farming. It's rocky and narrow, and the cedar stand along the bank smells incredible in the heat of July. I take Sophie out there sometimes on weekends. We walk the fence line and throw rocks in the creek, and I tell her about how the land works, how an easement operates, how survey markers are set, how the county road right-of-way interacts with private property. She mostly listens. Sometimes she asks questions that are better than the ones I was asking at her age. Last month, she looked at the bridge from the bank. You can see one corner of it through the trees from the southeast section, and said, "Dad, who built that bridge?" I thought about how to answer that. "Your grandfather bought the land it stands on," I said, "and then he made sure it could never be taken away." She thought about this. Why didn't he just fix it? "He was fixing something bigger than the bridge," I said. She accepted this with the equanimity of a 9-year-old who has learned that adult explanations are sometimes partial and that this is okay. We threw more rocks in the creek. On the drive home, she fell asleep in the back seat, and I thought about my father walking into a county recorder's office alone, going through microfilm for 2 hours, finding an absence in a document and seeing a future in that absence. A future in which 47 families were protected, in which a bridge was fixed, in which a piece of land was held in trust for something larger than one man's profit. He didn't need me to see that future. He got there on his own, but he needed me to build it. And I think, if I'm honest, that's what he was waiting for all along. Not for me to catch up, not for me to prove myself. Just for the right moment, the one where both of us were standing on opposite ends of the same bridge, looking at each other, and the only thing left to do was walk toward the middle. I'm glad I did. I'm glad he waited. The bridge at Otter Creek Estates now has a projected service life of 60 years. The conservation easement on the northern 800 acres is permanent. The cedar stand on my 50 acres is still standing. My father is 72 now. He still walks his land every morning. Some things don't change. Most things are better that way.